Okay, let's go ahead and get started with our next lecture. No real announcements. I'll just ducktail off of what was said in the previous lecture series on police brutality and excessive force. Discussion post 7 grades are now up, and of course discussion post 8 is available live. You should have that original response done by 5 p.m. on Wednesday, today April 5th. Recall that you'll have your responses due by Sunday. I also will reiterate the final exam will be administered on one day only, April 24th. For those that will be unable to make it, there will be no alternative date and no alternative administration date. Instead, you'll be asked to complete an 8 to 10 page term paper. So I highly recommend not missing the exam. For those that think that they will not be able to accommodate the date, let me know far in advance so that you get plenty of time to work on that paper. Otherwise, you'll only have a week. So I would refer to the other video lecture to get more information. You'll be able to glean more from that series. So let's just go ahead and dive right into it. I did receive a variety of comments from you all in relation to the announcement that I made on Blackboard. To remind you, for those that don't remember, it was in regards to what content we should cover in these last few weeks of the semester, what material would most interest you. I did receive a lot of great feedback. In general, most people seem to be opposed to having a separate discussion on procedural justice, but seeing, in lieu of this weather debacle that we've had this week, largely now, Wednesday afternoon, we're seeing that the weather really wasn't all that bad, but nevertheless, classes, the state of class is still the same. I wanted to cover procedural justice anyway, so we're going to get through this material, and we're going to talk a lot about the reservoir of goodwill, a point of information that I have referred to frequently throughout the semester in my lecture series, and kind of tie it into procedural justice as a theory, as a frame of operation. So law enforcement, we'll start with where law enforcement lies in relation to their level of respectability, I suppose we could call it. Local law enforcement officers enjoy an extremely high degree of respect. In fact, comparatively to all other technical positions, they have a greater level of respect among the majority, the plurality of the population, than any other occupation. Military physicians, media providers, and educators. And this is actually up since 2015. And if you refer to our previous lecture on police brutality, you'll also recall there was a statistic in 2015 that police citizen encounters were the most violent they have been in decades. So this is an interesting juxtaposition. The question to ask here is why people's perception of law enforcement matters and how it contributes to the work that is done in law enforcement. Opinion is consistent across most age groups, political and ideological perspectives, race, those living in rural and urban areas. But in general, the perception of the public helps law enforcement operate more effectively and efficiently. This reservoir of goodwill, the capacity and complicitness in or willingness to comply with the law is a big part of it. An individual's perception of the law colors and conditions the way they respond to figures of the law and therefore sources of authority. There are divergent opinions, most undoubtedly. Respect and confidence are different from one another. People can respect law enforcement, but they can have a low degree of confidence in their ability to perform the law, or rather, enforce the law and perform their job objectively. Opinions about police confidence are different. So less than 30% of African Americans and only about 50% of white Americans have confidence in law enforcement in their ability to control crime and to do it in a way that is bias-free. So someone that is confident in their their law enforcement's abilities are really saying that they believe that objective decision making is within the realm of possibilities. People that are young, under the age of 30, African Americans, undocumented immigrants, and those living in urban areas generally have lower levels of confidence. Now, they still have the same degree of respect, but lower levels of confidence. That is, in some way, they don't believe that the law can be enforced objectively. And this is pretty interesting because this also, in a way, ties into a historical legacy that that minority outgroups, youth, people living in cities have generally held a historical relationship, have held with sources of authority, and this continues today. So in this, there's a body of work, a theory that has been fleshed out in kind of psychological responses to authority, called procedural justice. Now, procedural justice is a pretty well-researched body of work in our discipline and in many other disciplines. It refers to the idea of fairness in processes that resolve disputes and allocate resources objectively. It's not necessarily a practice, but a philosophy and a movement which promotes change, greater levels of legitimacy, and enhances officer safety. It's really centrally concerned with legitimacy. That is, legitimacy and inefficacy of the law, suggesting that legitimacy of authority encourages people to acknowledge authority and see the law as real. Again, the reservoir of goodwill, people's willingness to submit to the law, people's willingness to be police, people's willingness to see law enforcement as legitimate forms of authority. Leventhal, who was a pretty prolific scholar in this area, identified 6 criteria for procedural justice, or the control of within procedural justice: consistency, the ability to suppress bias, decision quality and accuracy, that is, types of decisions that are made and the accuracy or the consistency in which they are applied, correctability, representation, ethicality. And each contributes to what are essentially amounted to what are seen as fair judgments. People are going to perceive law enforcement to be more effective and deserving of respect when they see the procedures as just. And what's important is that it's not the outcome that's important, but the process and by how we get there. The means, not the end. So this is an interesting sort of converse of noble cause. Noble cause suggests this. Noble cause is a kind of an ideology, suggests that it's the end that justifies the means. That the end result, the outcome, if it's suitable and desirable, is good enough to justify whatever means are necessary to get there. Procedural justice would say that actually it's the means that are very important. It's not the outcome so much. The outcome, that is, they get arrested or that they go to jail, isn't so much as important as how they're handled, how the interaction, the means by which they come to be arrested, the means by which they come before a court or before the system. That's what's really important. It's critical for law enforcement to do the job the public wants to see them do, because ultimately that's what gives them the most freedom to be effective police officers and to effectively manage crime as a community level problem. Now, the model focuses on how people treat police, how police treat people, and suggests that this treatment informs people's views on police legitimacy. And antecedent means it before. So people's perceptions of police legitimacy are completely dependent upon how they are treated by police, or how other people they know are treated by the police. In the previous lecture series on police brutality, we talked about a lot about people having indirect and direct experiences. That is, primary, secondary, tertiary experiences. And those experiences, even if they are not directly felt, even indirect experiences are almost just as powerful predictors of their opinions on police legitimacy as the ones that might be experienced in a personal way. They don't necessarily assess police based on outcomes themselves, whether they got charged with a crime, but whether or not they or somebody they knew received fair treatment, respect, or dignity. People who hold law enforcement in high esteem, those are the ones, kind of the default group, may see an outcome-oriented model as the best explanation for their attitudes toward the police. So that is, what is the outcome? Getting a criminal off the street. However, it fails to incorporate those people who are cynical in regards to authority. So people that have a natural distrust are predisposed and inclined to believe that law enforcement is unfair, that they don't follow objective rules. So this model really differs from where police actions are legitimized by their ability to catch rule breakers and their performance in crime fighting. It's really more about the fairness in their procedure, not the fairness in their outcome. And this is a question that I pose to the class. Why is it that so many people smoke marijuana despite its legality in many places? Marijuana is illegal in most states. 8 states have recreational marijuana. I believe 42 states have some form of medicinal marijuana. Now that is a huge victory for liberty. It's a huge victory for criminal justice reform. But data tells us, self-reported statistics suggest to us, or self-reported descriptive data suggest to us that the number of people that smoke marijuana far outnumbers, and I don't just mean smoke marijuana once, use it regularly and recreationally, far outnumbers the number of people that live in states where it's recreationally legal, or might even be available in medicinal ways. So that tells us 2 things. It tells us that marijuana is generally seen by the majority of the public, 60% of the population, who sees marijuana as viable to be recreationally legal, and plus that percentage might even be higher for those that see marijuana as a suitable medicinal alternative. That population does not see existing law as legitimate, as fair. It's not a real law, and for many people it's probably unenforceable. So they don't see authority over that dominion. Now there are a few pillars, I guess we could call them, of the procedural justice model. That is fairness, impartiality or transparency, the ability to provide someone with voice, an active voice. Those 3 are the primary pillars or cornerstones. Fairness describes a situation where the norms of entitlement or propriety are fulfilled. So what does that mean? It's a violation of entitlement, especially when we're talking about the police. It means unfair, inappropriate, or impolite behavior. So the norms of propriety. How do we behave in public? How do we behave when we interact with each other? It is seen as socially or antisocial, against the norm, to interact with people in our everyday life in rude or impolite ways. So procedural justice would argue that this interaction should be no different when law enforcement encounters a citizen. It should be no different than your interaction with the barista at Starbucks when you place an order. It should be fair and polite, and the interaction should treat the situation with the dignity that it's deserved. So law enforcement is seen as a noble field. People place high value in having police who behave within the scope of respectability. We want law enforcement officers that treat us with dignity, with respect. Fair procedure ensures cooperation, and that cooperation is enhanced when people feel that they are being given a fair shot. Fair shot meaning respectable. So how do we ensure that police are fair? Well, we ensure fair procedure, and in terms of just typical, not atypical, but typical normative behavior, polite interaction. Those that see the police as unfair are more likely to have cynicism for police effectiveness and are just going to see the law as unjust. So it's very important that diffusion happens from the very beginning. Once a police-citizen interaction ensues, the immediate next step should be diffusion, a reduction in any kind of initial tension. It's very important to kind of elevate the situation to a plane of fairness. Impartiality and transparency is, of course, very important in all facets of our government. It includes a lack of bias and what is perceived to be honesty. People that see sources of authority, government figures, as honest, and real efforts to be fair. Explain what is being done and why it's being done. And importantly, speaking a common language. It's very important for, at least in this procedural justice model, for officers to speak a common language. They avoid legal jargon and procedures that are unfamiliar and really intimidate people. People regularly report that when they have interactions with law enforcement, the procedural codes, the rituals, the responses are intimidating. They create a sense of separation. And so people tend to fear that and immediately become defensive. Individuals judge the police as being impartial, though, when they view their actions as consistent and objective with the law. That is, everyone's going to get the same sort of treatment, and it's going to be in relation to the situation. The distribution of outcomes should be equitable, so everybody, the same offense, should receive proportionally identical results, and it shouldn't be colored by pre-existing biases. Finally, there's giving voice. This is the voice effect, which presumes that persons given the ability to express their views kind of have a hand in the pot. Believe that voice will help them control their outcomes. Now, this is probably the least realistic, I think, in practice. It sounds nice, and I'm going to be completely fair and honest about this. In our society, in our culture, we have very much created this idea that law enforcement officers are above, in all situations, are above the citizenry. And we've done so for good reason, because they are figures of authority, and they are tasked. They are tasked with this great burden of enforcing the law. And so what they say goes, and that is the best way to ensure that the law is enforced. And that's part of that is officer discretion. But giving voice is important because it may allow those that are the suspect or the offender, their arguments might persuade the decision maker to a more desirable outcome. We do this in the courtroom. Judges have the ability to exercise discretion and do so within the context of the defense. They do so in the context of both parties. This is the expectation, but it doesn't necessarily have to dictate the outcome. Even if the outcome isn't desirable, it at least enhances a person's ability to exercise their own human dignity in giving a voice, that they're not silenced. People feel more respected and are going to perceive a greater degree of fairness when they're given a voice to speak. This is true for every individual. If you're in a classroom and you're not given the opportunity to speak, you're going to feel like you're being silenced. Even if your opinion is the popular one, it's very important to give everyone the ability, freedom of speech. And that freedom of speech should not be limited when once you are confronted with a situation where there's a form of authority. You should be given that same freedom of speech, and it should be done so in a forum that is free and open, and that's going to elevate the conversation. It's going to elevate the degree of perceived justice. So how do we implement procedural justice? Well, community-level policing uses procedural justice in its efforts to connect officers to stakeholders within their patrol area. This is one way. We've talked about how officers who work and live in the same neighborhood have a vested interest in what happens in the neighborhood, and therefore they maintain relationships with those people. So there's an effort to create public cooperation, and that public cooperation is a way to drive equitable outcomes. And not only that, but to promote officer safety. Officer safety is enhanced when members of the community participate in the process. Organizations that fail to do so, of course, the converse effect of that is that organizations that fail to do so create deviant subcultures and breed cynicism. So, when procedural justice is practiced at an organizational level, that is a full transformation. There is organizational transformation that comes along with an improvement on work culture and decreases in workplace polarization. So procedural justice, if you recall the lecture on community-oriented policing, the two are really inseparable, and I can see why some people would have seen this material as repetitive. But this is an addendum. This is kind of an extension of our conversations on community-level policing. So when we think about procedural justice as a theoretical model, we should also think of it within the practical framework of COP, community-oriented policing, and policing that is really focused on like a local neighborhood level. That's all I have for this one. I told you this would be a short little lecture series. So those are our 2 lectures. Hopefully this will catch us up. Be sure to refer to the video, both videos, this one and the police brutality, excessive use of force, for all the notes, because this material will appear on the quiz and exam. So if you have any questions, feel free to contact me. If not, enjoy your afternoon.